There we go.
Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, boaters out there. Thank you for joining us. This is episode 41 of the Seattle Boat Show Live. And Peter Schrappen, who's normally with us from Northwest Marine Trade Association, and Mark Bunzel with Waggoner, they are both off this week. We think they're giving us an April Fool's. But we are so pleased to have George Harris with us. He's the president and CEO of Northwest Marine Trade Association. He's our co-host this evening.
Welcome, George.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Lorena. Thank you, Leonard. Nicely done. I told you I was going to just put it right out on the table. I am not as funny as Peter Schrappen. So, but here I am looking forward to it. Hard to believe, 41 episodes that you guys have done this.
Excellent.
Congratulations. Good for you. Thank you.
Thank you and appreciate your being here. I want to thank our sponsor, Jean Grosbeck Realty of Anacortes. They sponsor our weekly webcasts, and she can help you find the right home, a lot, or even a dock in Anacortes. If you're thinking about moving out of the city, she can help you with that next step. Later this evening, we have a great program. Kalen Wilson will be talking about fuel polishing and the fuel tank cleaning process and preventative measures and much more. We've already collected a lot of questions for him, and if our viewers have questions, be sure to go to Zoom chat to put in your questions. Before we introduce our speaker, we've got several updates to go through. And George, I understand you have some legislative updates and some information about boatyards.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I would call that a policy update. So, you know, our state agencies like the Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, have a important role in the regulations we have as boaters or boating businesses. And there's something called the 5-year boatyard permit here in Washington State. It's a federal permit that's run by the state, and all of our boatyards have to comply with it. And it gets renewed every 5 years. And the draft version of that permit came out about 2 weeks ago. So Peter and I have been talking with the folks at Department of Ecology and all of our member boatyards, and we've been supportive of tough but fair permits, tough but fair regulations, so that we can have the clean water we need here in Puget Sound. But this one might be a little too tough right now. So those are the conversations we're having with the Department of Ecology. I think it might be worthy of a full segment about boatyards. And remember, we had the copper bottom paint phase out legislation that NMTA initiated back in 2012, just because the regulations are getting so tight on these boatyards. And we were talking about this morning, Lorena and Leonard, but basically a boatyard has to take a water sample 5 times a year and then send that to the state, and they measure for the amount of copper that's in there, zinc and some other materials, but it's copper and zinc that are the really tough ones. And I'm just so proud of our boatyards because they've come so far in the last 15 years. If you go back to 2002, there was about 410 parts per billion copper on average in these samples. And then in 2008, we got it down to 110. In 2010, we got it down to 72. 2014, on average, it was down to 31. 2017, we got it down to 25. There's a nice little graph I'm looking at over to the side. We've really been bending the curve down But the new permit says boatyards have to get to 15 parts per billion. And that is, I think, unattainable. And one of the things that's happened through all of this regulation is we've been losing our boatyards. So if you go back to the mid 2000s, we had roughly 125 boatyards in Washington State. Then kind of early 2010, we had 75, and right now we're down to 48 boatyards in Washington State. So, so if you're a boater and you've gone to a boatyard and it doesn't feel like it did 5 or 10 years ago because you can't work on that bottom yourself, you can't remove those zincs yourself, it's because of these tough regulations. So that's something we're working on right now. And then I always like to talk about salmon fishing. So north of Falcon is going on right now, and the state and the tribes, the co-managers, are negotiating those seasons right now. That's a big deal. And I think the seasons are going to look pretty similar to what they were last year. We'll get kind of start to hear some final announcements in about 2 weeks. And then I got a preliminary look at the shrimp seasons in Puget Sound, particularly the San Juan Islands. It's going to be more conservative than a year ago. Right now, the state is talking about 5 weekends for shrimping starting on May 22nd. So a lot of people like myself count on, or you kind of expect shrimping to open up in early May. It's not going to be starting until May 19th this year, it looks like. And then they've kind of got it set up to match the soft tides in Puget Sound. So kind of like every other weekend after that for 5 weekends is what they're looking at like that. So then Peter's really proud of a bill that got out of Senate Ways and Means this week. And it is a bill that allows chartered vessels from out of state to come into Puget Sound. So for some folks, they might say, well, gee, why is that good for me? I don't need more boats in Puget Sound, right? There's plenty of them. But for our member businesses, the marinas, the boatyards, and the service providers, having those extra vessels in here to do the work is really important. And right now, a lot of those vessels just go right to British Columbia for the service and the tourism. I like to think of them as, mini cruise ships coming into Washington State.
Did you hear anything about shrimping in Hood Canal? Anything about that?
Did see that. I don't have that right in front of me, Leonard. I could do a little research and get you the preliminary Hood Canal dates. I think what's been unique about the San Juans over the last 5 or 6 years is there's been a lot of days that you could shrimp almost every day of the week 3 or 4 years ago. And the San Juans have kind of been discovered for shrimping versus Hood Canal. They've got very specific, days when you can shrimp, or down in Marine Area 9 off of Everett, or Area 10 off of Seattle. And so there's just been a lot of transfer of effort up to the San Juan Islands. And so the department has seen that. So that's why we're seeing less and less opportunity up here.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
You have some updates too, Leonard. You want to go through those?
Well, I just did. One of them I just started on last time, and that has to do with the Mont Lake cut and the bridge and the new openings for that. So this summer they're going to be replacing the deck on the Mont Lake bridge, and the openings on that are going to be reduced to one leaf. So only one leaf in the month of August. So August 9th until Labor Day weekend. They're going to be opening one leaf anytime that you show up. If you want both the leaves opened and the whole thing, you need 24-hour notice. The restrictive part of it happens after Labor Day weekend. And after Labor Day weekend and through September and possibly into October, possibly into the end of October, the bridge will only open one leaf and only on the weekends. So no openings on weekdays during September and October. So time and plan your transits on that. That was interesting. And by the way, I don't know who exactly, I don't know if you know, George, but there was an original request and plan from WashDOT, and it was much more restrictive in August. And I know that was that NMTA that got involved in that?
Yeah, we were contacted. Peter was contacted, and there was some concerns that the Mont Lake Bridge would be shut. I think it was going to be for a full month, and so Peter was able to work with the city and get that changed. Yeah,
especially in August. That was the part that was just kind of wow, that's terrible. So another one, there unfortunately a couple of boats in Quartermaster Harbor at the Quartermaster Marina caught fire. Luckily, that was contained with just the 2 vessels, and so it did not spread. That happened earlier this week. And then the really big news is that up in the Broughtons, that's Quatsy Bay Marina, and that has been sold. And so there's a new owner up there. It's not going to be open for 2021 season because the new owners are going to do some renovations. And Annika and Max, who are the previous owners, the sellers of that, they were there for 25 years, raised their 2 children, and built the marina over 25 years. And it's been on the market for a while. They have some new owners on that. Don't know too much about the owners. There was some rumor that it was going to be an eco tours or something. Is that right, Lorraine?
Yes, the thought is they might have eco tours as another revenue generating activity for Quatsy.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful area, a favorite destination for many boaters.
And you have some?
Yes, just a reminder, May 1, of course, is opening day of boating season, a big event that's been in our area for ages. Opening day has always been fun. This year, it will be virtual, so there won't be any water participation this year. But yacht clubs and individual boaters are encouraged to decorate their boat. The theme is Rock Around the Dock. And you can send a photo or a video. The video should be no longer than 1 minute, and the photo should be at least 2 megabytes in size. You need to register for the parade, the virtual parade. Registrations are due by 5 p.m. on April 20th, and you can take care of registration by going to seattleyachtclub.org and fill out your registration. The public can view the parade on May 1 at noon, and you'll find the link on the Yacht Club's website as well. They will be showing this video of wonderfully decorated boats. When you make your video, it should be, or photo, it should be landscape, horizontal format. If you're a sailboat, they do want the mast in there as well. So get the entire boat.
With the
And
mast in there.
sounds fun.
You have to back up quite a ways on that.
Yeah, that might be a little challenging.
So where are these viewed, or what do you do? What happens with these?
You go online, you view this on May 1 at noon,
Okay.
and you can get the link from Seattle Yacht Club website.
Got it.
COVID, as we've heard, some of the areas in Washington state have been increasing in their cases. Others are holding steady. There's concern about variants. And again, it's a reminder to all of us to keep wearing our masks and washing hands and so forth. It's also been reported that some people who were tested after they had their full vaccination, they actually tested positive for COVID, even though they had had both vaccinations. It's very rare, only about 0.01%. So people are still encouraged to get their vaccinations. It's better than becoming severely ill. Certainly, again, it's a reminder to social distance and wash hands. BC, British Columbia, they are reporting a spike in COVID cases. Unfortunately, they had over 2,500 cases and 6 deaths in 1 weekend. They had several outbreaks at nursing homes. It was also reported that they had 329 confirmed cases of variants. So again, it's the variant is the concern. No word on the border as yet. But due to this spike, BC is shutting down all indoor activities, including dining and group fitness and holiday or religious gatherings for the next 3 weeks. So that's unfortunate, but we'll keep you posted again on things in BC and when the border might be opening.
There was the Greater Victoria Harbor Authority official was asking for a plan for getting the border open. And that to me was the good news part of it, was that there are some officials, local officials too, that are that are asking that a plan be drawn up for getting the border open somehow.
Both sides of the border are, yes, discussing that. The hope is there'll be a phased opening of the border, perhaps a requirement for vaccinations that's been talked about as well. So yes, there is hope that at least they're looking or studying how the border can be opened in a responsible way. So that's
Bright
good
spot.
news. Yeah, bright spot. Another bright spot, of course, boating is a great way to distance, right? And Seattle Easter Boat Parade sounds like great fun. It is live, and you can register to participate at seattleeasterboatparade.com. It's on April 3rd, and the parade starts at 2 o'clock. So decorate your boat in spring colors, bright spring colors, and Easter motif, and join the fun.
April 3rd, so
April
day
3rd.
after tomorrow.
Right.
So get your decorating done.
Yeah,
now.
decorating done, and you do have to register. So go online and register for that, seattleeasterboatparade.com.
And that's in Lake Union, right?
They will be leaving South Lake Union, gathering next door to Duke's Seafood. They travel to the Ballard Locks, where they turn around and end their parade at Fishman's Terminal, west of the Ballard Bridge. Again, sounds like lots of fun. When you check in, call on BHF channel 68 to Captain Jack and check in. The lead boat is a beautiful classic boat, Johanna, the Johanna K, and the large boats line up first, then sailboats who need a bridge opening, and then paddle boats, including paddle boards. So anybody and everybody can get out on the water, decorate in the Easter festivities, and join the fun. And last, Anacortes Yacht and Boat Show is May 21 and 22nd. There'll be about 60 to 100 boats, and brokers will be there to answer your questions and show you around. And George, you probably have some more information.
Yeah, well, thanks for mentioning that. We're really excited to get back with an in-person event, albeit very carefully. So we'll be using the guest dock at Port of Anacortes' Cap Sandy Marina, Sea Dock. There's 60 slips there, so we'll be doing one boat per slip, side tide, and it's kind of got natural, those are big slips. I think they're 46 and 60 feet. So, you know, if you've got one Grand Banks on a 60-foot slip, there'll be plenty of room there. And so we're going to do it for 2 days. There's no admission. It just feels really good to kind of get back in the game. And boaters are having a tough finding good boats right now. And so there's going to be 60 boats that are for sale up there on those dates, the May 21, 22. So I'm still getting used to that, a Friday and Saturday. So really looking forward to it. And current guidelines say we can have 400 people on the dock at any one time. Masks will be required. Only one family or one party at a time on a boat. So I think we can do it safely and responsibly, and really looking forward to do it. And then maybe we're going to go into the big news about the Seattle Boat Show.
No, go ahead, please, George.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Lorena. So we share the stadium with the Seattle Seahawks. And for any NFL fans watching, I think it was yesterday that the NFL made a big decision to go to a 17-game season that they've been talking about for a number of years. Typically, it's a 16-game season. The owners like a 17-game season for the, extra TV ratings and revenue and that sort of thing. But the players don't necessarily like it. One more game, they could get injured. Well, anyway, after a number of years of discussion, they've decided to go with the 17-game season, which means the Super Bowl is going to be a week later, and our dates sort of follow the Super Bowl. So we don't have the dates during the playoffs or the regular season. So the dates for the Seattle Boat Show in 2022 are going to be Friday, February 4th to Saturday, February 12th. So sort of in contemporary times, that'll be the latest Seattle Boat Show ever. It puts us kind of right up on the Miami Boat Show. So we like to think of ourselves as the Miami of the West Coast. So we'll have Seattle that weekend, and then President's Day weekend will be the Miami show. So I like the direction we're going with the virus and whatnot, and hopeful that we can have a in-person show in February of 2022. So And then while I've got the microphone, Lorena and Leonard, I see there was a question about the boatyard permit. If I could just maybe touch on that. Sam asked, are they getting tougher on stormwater runoff? And so just to be real clear, yes, Sam, it's the rain comes down on the boatyard, and most boatyards are 1 or 2 acres large. And then that water runs into Puget Sound, or the receiving waters, they call it, whether that's the Ship Canal or Puget Sound. And it literally just kind of comes out of a pipe. And it's that water that comes out of the pipe when it rains that's measured. And we did a study back, probably 8 years ago, and 0.03% of all the copper that goes into Puget Sound comes from the boatyards. And that was when we had 75 or 100 boatyards, so only 0.03%. The vast majority of the copper that goes into Puget Sound, the majority of the copper comes from the roads, our roads, Interstate 5, Highway 520, because there's copper, there's nickel, there's cadmium in our brake pads. So every time you touch your brakes, a little puff of heavy metals lands on the road, and then that goes into Puget Sound. But that's called non-point source pollution coming from the boatyards. It's called point source pollution, and it's just really easy to regulate. So I'm really proud of our boatyards with how far they've come. So maybe we'll get our own segment on that in coming weeks.
Yes, that would be good. Sounds great.
Well, I think we're ready to move on to our guest speaker tonight, and that's Kalen Wilson. And Kalen's going to join us here and talk about fuel, our boat fuel, and a few other things. But Kalen is with West Coast Tank, and he's been the lead fuel technician for the past 6 years, and he's now project team manager at West Coast Fuel. And he's going to talk to us about why we might want to be concerned about our fuel and our fuel tanks. So welcome, Kalen.
Yeah, hi there, Kalen. Welcome.
Thank you guys for having me. So yeah, I understand this is a very hot topic, and there's a lot of interest in this. So today, yeah, we're going to be talking all about what you can do, microbial growth, what you can do to prevent it, the steps you can take, and how it all works, how fuel polishing works, how tank cleaning works, and all that good stuff.
We understand you've been very busy. You haven't had time off in what, 4 weeks or more?
Yeah, about 3 weeks. Yeah, we're working. We're supposed to be open 5 days a week, but we're working 7 days a week, and we're trying to play catch up right now. So
And so,
it's
Kalen,
a very fast start to the season this year.
Kalen, you do more than just vessels. Is that right? You do.
That is correct. So the majority of what we do is marine based. However, we also have a land based operation that focuses more on tanks on land, like let's say hospitals, gas stations, fueling docks, generators, stuff of that matter.
And you're busy right now. Boats are a big part of that increase right now.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, boats have gone up quite a bit right now. And I don't see it slowing down anytime soon.
Well, I
Kalen,
think that sounds really good news, Kalen. I like to say the mission at NMTA is we want people to wake up in the morning and go boating. So it sounds like people are waking up in the morning and say they want to use their boats.
That is right. Yeah, a lot of people are out there now, and these boats have been sitting for a long time. A lot of these people are firing up for the first time. So we'll be talking all about that today as well.
So Kalen, you had sent us some pictures here, and I was going to do a share screen, and we can look at some nice clean fuel and some that's not that clean. And,
all right.
I'm just going to run through these slides, and you tell me to stop or do, if you want something paused on things.
Yeah, so this is a land-based fuel. So if it's yellow, this is for vehicles on land. If it's pink, it's for marine. That's a color you don't want to see. That was a dirty tank on land. So here, this is the majority of what we do. That's an access plate that we install, and I'll touch base on this in a little bit as well. And this is what you find inside of the tanks. This is, for the most part, it's that microbial growth we'll talk about. This is after a tank has been cleaned out. You can see quite the difference. This was an aluminum tank. If you look closely, you can see some pitting in there. So we'll go over that as well. The customer has the option of lining those tanks. That's a close-up of corrosion that you might find. So after the tanks have been cleaned, we inspect the fuel tanks, and sometimes we find pitting, and we leave it up to the customer whether they want to line that or paint over that or not. And this particular tank was leaking from that pitting.
We were talking earlier, and you were talking about how the microbial growth actually causes the pitting here.
Right. So the majority, everything we'll talk about today is based on that microbial growth. And what that is, it's when you have water and diesel and the right pH in your fuel tanks. As many of you probably know the famous quote, Dr. Malcolm says, life will find a way. That's exactly what happens here. Life finds a way to grow inside of those conditions. And fuel tanks just so happen to be ripe for algae or microbial growth, sometimes called the bug. And so it's essentially just a bunch of microbes that are growing and feeding off of each other inside of the fuel tanks.
So
You're saying that it's acidic, right?
It is very acidic. So typically what happens is that microbial growth settles in the lower parts of the tank, and then it can condense into one little area and eat away. Because it's so acidic, it feeds off the metal, and over time, if left untreated or not cleaned, it will potentially eat its way through the tanks. And that's something we'll also be going over. Sometimes you see, this is a picture here. It's a little bit blurry, but you can see water in the fuel tanks, and mixed in is actually microbial growth. Sometimes it looks a lot like mud. It takes on all sorts of different colors, consistencies. Sometimes when it's fresher, it's more like an algae, and it can float around in the tank. And sometimes when it gets older, it sticks onto the bottom of the tank and it starts to solidify. So that was some fresh algae there. This picture here is this is actually gasoline. And this is what we often do is water removal. And water is the big part of microbial growth. But this was removing water from a gasoline tank. That's one of the services we provide. So if you ever get water into the fuel tank, and this actually happens quite a bit, we are able to pull up and get this water out of the fuel tanks. So here we have a picture of, that's microbial growth. However, there's a few inches of diesel on top. So if we were to pull that diesel out, you'd be able to get a better picture of that growth. And a lot of times that's all it is. You just see a black sludge in the bottom of the tank. But that in fact is that microbial growth just growing in the bottom of the fuel tanks.
It looks like a thin layer, but you're suggesting it's thicker than that?
It varies. Sometimes it's just a little thin layer, and we've opened up tanks that have had 4 or 5 inches. It completely varies. So it grows on top of each other, and as I said, it's always a little bit different. And so this one was a thinner growth here, yeah. This is after the tank's been cleaned, so no more. This is the most effective way to clean your tanks, and that is just going inside, cutting, cleaning, scraping, degreasing, pressure washing, evacuating. So that's what it looks like after the growth has been taken away. This is just right here. We're just evacuating some fuel to get the tanks empty so we can get in there and work. What you see there is actually a access plate. So we cut into these tanks. That's how we clean these tanks. And right there is one of our access holes that we cut. And I can go over in a little bit how we do that as well. So here you can see some of the colors. So you can see that it's dark in places and it's kind of brownish, yellowish in other places. So that right there is that growth. And if it's not treated, then it just continues to grow down there. So eventually what that leads to is clogged filters. Your boat could potentially shut off while you're out boating from that getting sucked up into the supply lines. You can see a supply and a return line there to your engine. And that growth is right there underneath the supply line. So this customer, actually his engine had shut off because he was pulling the growth into the filters. That's just patched up. So obviously we can't leave it as it is all the time, but that's pretty good. So we cut our holes, we clean the tanks, and we get it patched up and move on.
And the Raycor filter looks clean right now.
Yep. So the filter is good to go now, and now that customer's using additives and out there boating. So this is part of what we talked about with the land-based operation. That was a before and an after picture. So after we polished the fuel, and what fuel polishing is, to really briefly, is essentially circulating the fuel through filters back into the tank until we've collected all the sediment, all the microbes, all the water, and then just shoot the clean fuel back into the tank. So yeah, this was a job on land at a generator, I believe a truck stop of all places.
Sorry, I was looking at the questions here. There was a question, question and answer. Somebody was asking, when you say fuel tank, are you talking about gasoline or diesel only, or are you talking about diesel and gas?
So for the most part, we're going to be talking about diesel. The growth, 9 times out of 10, we work on the diesel tanks. However, gasoline is very similar. So it's a little bit different animal and it's a little bit more complicated, but you also get funguses that grow inside of gasoline. So we do as well polish and clean gasoline tanks. It's just not as necessary as the diesel tanks.
Got it.
So Kalen, when you're doing the work on the fuel polishing on a diesel tank, do you do that through the existing fuel pickup or the existing fill, or do you actually have to create access into the tank?
So it's situational. So what we do is we go out and we provide free estimates where we just go look at the tank and then decide what the best option is. But in order to polish the fuel, you definitely need access. And so a lot of times we'll go in through the ports that are already there. We also physically go inside the tanks a lot too. So if we can't get into the tank, then we install access plates ourselves.
And so that sounds to me like actually cutting a hole in the tank to create access.
That is correct.
And you can do that with diesel fuel in the tank?
So we typically remove the diesel fuel from the tank. If we cannot remove the diesel fuel from the tank, we do what's called a tank purge or immersion. And what that is basically the fuel, the fuel and the roof of the tank, there's an air void there. And we shoot in, let's say like nitrogen. We shoot in nitrogen into the tank, into that air, and that takes away all the explosive vapors. And then once those explosive vapors
in the diesel fuel.
Yeah. So then once those are gone, and this is only if we can't get the diesel out. If we can get the diesel out, that's what we do most of the time. So this is worst case scenario.
And then how would you do that for gasoline, a gasoline tank? If you couldn't get access?
So it's actually the same for gasoline. So we do a tank purge as well. Again, we typically like to remove all the gasoline first, obviously. We have marine chemists on site in a lot of the situations where it can be a little bit dangerous. And they help provide the permits for us to cut into these tanks.
So you could actually cut into a gasoline tank.
You actually can cut into a gasoline tank, and I have done it before.
But don't do it at home, it sounds like.
No, quite a few times, and definitely don't do it at home.
Okay.
It had my heart pumping, to say the least. So again, this is another example of microbial growth inside the fuel tank. This tank is nearly emptied, so we got a good picture here. And that's another compartment of the fuel tank. So every fuel tank we go to is a little bit different, and most of the times the microbial growth will settle in the lowest end of the tank. However, some tanks, it gets caught up in the other compartments. So sometimes we have to get in and clean every single compartment. And if people aren't familiar with the fuel tank, it's essentially a box, and those walls there are the baffling walls that keep the fuel from sloshing around. And so in order to properly clean the tanks, we need to get into every single compartment, which means cutting holes into those compartments.
When you cut, do you cut into the baffles, or do you cut into each of the side walls to get into each of the sections?
Usually it's the side walls. Now, sometimes we've had to cut through the baffling walls if there's absolutely no way into a tank. Sometimes that is the only option. You cut one hole into the side of the tank, and then we put our tools into the tank and cut through a baffling wall. And we have specialty tools that allow us to, and adapters that allow us to clean the tank, as well as we use an endoscopic camera, so we're able to get in one compartment and clean. But that's pretty rare, and we prefer to get into every compartment. So this is just another example here of microbial growth inside of the tank.
Wow, that's really something, Kalen. The pictures are kind of startling. So
yeah, I figured this was going to be an interesting one, because a lot of times people just unaware of this whole industry. We're in a bit of a niche industry, and people are shocked all the time when we show them pictures of the tanks.
Well, if you went to a marina filled with, let's just say it's a marina with 100 slips, and there's 100 recreational boats, and they've all got diesel engines on them, what percentage of those boats, some are new, some are old, would have these kind of pictures taken?
I'd say, now my view is a little biased because I'm inside of dirty tanks every day, but I would say probably about 20 to 25% of these tanks probably need to be cleaned out. This is part of our land-based operation, and these are those above ground storage tanks that actually hold the fuel. So when you go and fill up, this is where your fuel is being held. These also require cleaning and polishing. You can see what's coming out of there. And this is a little bit of a controversial topic, but yeah, and we won't say where these tanks are from, but yeah, you can see what comes out of them, and it's very good that they're getting these things cleaned for everybody.
Kalen, there's a question on the chat asking, what are the options if your tank has pitting or is leaking?
Right, so this is what we do a lot, and nobody wants to see diesel in their bilge tank, and a lot of times people think that tank replacement is the only option, and that is definitely not the case. So when the tank is leaking, we do the cleaning process where we cut into the tanks, we clean them out, we scrub, we scrape, and then we actually add a new floor into the tank using different types of liners. And so for the most part, we have a 2-part epoxy that's mixed together by hand, and then we essentially just lay down a fresh floor over the new one, over the old floor, and then we seal it off to the wall. And what that does is the microbial growth doesn't actually react with the liner as it did the metal. So in a lot of cases, you line that tank, and that boat could be good for another 20, 30, 40 years. Because it's that if it comes back, it's going to be sitting on top of the liner, and it's not going to eat through. So a lot of times that's the best option is to line these tanks. The other one is a paint on liner, and it's a 2-part, and it's just that you roll on the liner, and the advantage of that one is you can also go up the walls and you can even do the ceiling. However, that one has longer cure times and isn't as popular, but yeah, there's definitely ways to repair the tanks, and a lot of times people just don't know that. And so we try to get the word out that replacement is not your only option. You can also line these tanks, and relatively quickly. A lot of the jobs we do can be done in 1 to 2 days. So if you see diesel in the tank or in the bilge, we put those jobs priority. So a lot of times we get calls, frantic customers, and if we got somebody's tank leaking, we'll get in there right away and we'll get that tank emptied, clean, and repaired. So
I think you have a picture of the liner, and I was going to jump ahead a little bit, and I wanted to come back to this slide though, because I wanted you to talk about additives too. But
right.
I thought you had one in here where you had a liner. There you go. Is that a liner?
Yeah, so that's just that's a basic epoxy liner, and it works a lot like I'm sure everyone's familiar with JB Weld. Essentially, you just put the hardener and the A and the B together, and you seal the tank off. So this was a real quick job that it was isolated tank leaking from that corner, and they only had access to that corner, and they only wanted to repair that corner. So we went ahead and patched up their fuel tanks, and that is the epoxy liner right there that we're looking at.
I wanted to go back to that. Can you talk a little bit about additives and specifically, what do you recommend? And one of them, the question of what about the enzyme additives?
So all additives are good to a point. They're all effective if given the right situation. And this is kind of complicated because that microbial growth, it sits in the lowest part of the tank. It's heavier than, just as water is, it's heavier than fuel. So it sits at the bottom of the tank and it makes its way to the lowest corner. Those fuel additives, they also, you pour them in while you're filling up, and that's recommended with every fill up. They also make their way into the lowest corner. So they help in that concentrated area, but they don't, in most situations, they will miss. If you have growth in the welds or up on the walls or in other compartments, it may get missed with those additives. However, it does not hurt, and there's not really a bad additive. It's great to use them. We recommend, the one we're looking at here is the one that's recommended by all the big companies. And this is the one we typically recommend as well, Stanidine. But they're all going to help. They're all going to do the same thing, and you can't go wrong. The one bad thing that happens when you do add additives, if you have a really sticky, if that microbial growth is old and it's really sticky sitting on the floor of the tank, you add those, it's not harming anything at the moment, but you add additives in and it starts to eat away at them, and then it breaks them loose. And of course, when you're out boating, then that can get pulled in through the filters. So sometimes adding additives will actually clog your filters. And that's why we recommend cleaning the tanks. However, if you use the additives on newer boats, and you can prevent that growth from occurring. So it's best to, when your boat's new, just start using it and don't stop.
Boy, that sounds like a real catch-22. Use an additive, but if you've got an older boat, now you're worried that you're going to break something loose.
Right. That's why we push fuel tank cleaning is the best, most effective way. We can tell you 100% that it's
Kalen,
out
is
of
it
there.
possible? Let's just say, I go out and buy a new boat, brand new diesel. If I put the Stanidine in on every fill up, and I went boating here in our climate every summer, and then I didn't use the boat too much in the winter, is my tank going to be okay for 10 years?
Chances are it'll be better, but there's no guarantees. As I said, unfortunately, sometimes it can just be a Band-Aid. In other times, yeah, it'll help 100%.
What if I use my boat, every month, you know, just year round, and just
The
was
more you
always
use
moving.
it, the better. Just like anything, you don't want your old motorcycle sitting around. You want to fire it up. Chainsaws. The more you can fire your system up and get it to circulate, move it around, the less likely that microbial growth will form.
So
Kalen,
in the winter, would I want to be doing that monthly? Is that enough, or should I be doing that weekly? And should I run it for 15 minutes, or should I run it for an hour?
The more the better, but
Okay.
if you can only do it once a month, great. I'd say run it for 30 minutes to an hour, and just let the system circulate. There's a supply and a return, so that fuel is getting pulled in and pulled out and pushed back in, and those additives are moving around. So the more you can fire it up, the better, as goes with everything.
And then could I ever put too much Stanidine in?
I haven't heard of it. They don't recommend it, but
Follow the instructions.
yeah, follow the instructions. I've heard people pour the whole bottle in and nothing has happened, but I would still recommend just follow the directions. They're the experts.
And
Kalen,
then
we had a question there. A viewer was asking whether whether one tank type of material is more prone to problems than another type of tank material.
As far as the growth, no, but as far as leaking, yes. So unfortunately, the most popular tanks are aluminum fuel tanks, and then there's different grades of aluminum. Some aluminums are softer than others, and so aluminum, I'd say probably 80 to 90% of the tanks we repair are aluminum fuel tanks. So the growth will grow anywhere, but as far as leaking goes, most of the time, and that's not to say that it doesn't. We definitely see a lot of steel tanks leaking, but it's a little bit more rare for the steel tanks.
And somebody was asking about, is it best to keep the tank filled or full, basically? That the question always is, should I fill the tanks before the winter or when it
Right,
sits?
and that's a good question, and definitely keep them filled. So the reason why goes back to that air void. So if your tank is half empty, and the roof of the tank and the fuel is here, you have that air void. And in the Pacific Northwest, it gets hot, it gets cold. What the tank does is it heats up and it cools down, and we call this tank sweating. And then condensation starts to form on the roof of the tank in little droplets. And over time, those droplets make its way to the bottom of the tank, and that's how the growth starts. You need water for the microbial growth to form, and that's one way for it to get in. So definitely, before you park your boat for the winter time, top it off. We recommend that to almost everybody. Top it off and add some additives in there.
What is this we're looking at here? Obviously a clean tank, and then you sealed the ports
No,
on it?
so this is just an example. Fiberglass tanks is not something we see a lot of leaks in. And this was just inside of a fiberglass tank. And this one was leaking. However, this was actually unrelated to the microbial growth. This was just a repair job we had to do in a fiberglass tank. So a lot of times, it's not 99% of the times it's aluminum and steel tanks, and we know why those are leaking. Fiberglass tanks can leak too, but usually it's a pinhole leak from anywhere in the tank. They can be much more difficult to patch up a fiberglass tank. And this is just a shot inside the tank. So we're physically inside this tank right now, and we pressure tested this tank looking for a leak. Pressure testing is a topic. It's very difficult on boats. It has to be the right situation. And we were able to finally find this leak, but it took a few days and quite a few pressure tests. But when tanks are buried like this one, it becomes very difficult to find where the tank is actually leaking. So this was out of the ordinary than what we typically do, but we were still able to solve this problem.
What's normally the turnaround time for cleaning tanks? Couple days or longer?
Right. So, and actually in most cases, we do it so often. So we're completely mobile. And what that means is we pull up a work truck to the dock, we wheel down all our equipment next to the boat, we evacuate the fuel, and we get in there and we cut. We move fast. We do it so often that we move fast. So most of the times, these jobs are done in one day, sometimes 2 days, but rarely it goes past that. In some rare instances where, let's say you have to remove walls or floors or disconnect plumbing, then it can go on a little bit more. But yeah, most jobs can be done in one day.
So it looks like it's done in the water, Kalen. Are there any jobs that need to be done in a boatyard?
Yeah, absolutely. So these boats, we do them everywhere, and it can be boatyard, it can be a water, it can be at somebody's house in their backyard. Just yesterday, we were doing a fuel tank repair in Sammamish in somebody's backyard. So it happens everywhere. And if somebody wants to have their tank cleaned, we'll go to them. This is just another example of water in the fuel tank. And you can see there the sediment at the bottom and the cloudy fuel just above that. This is actually, that fuel right there is it's an older fuel, so the water molecules have started to combine with the diesel. That's why it's cloudy. I believe it's called distillation. But that's what's going on there. And that was a water removal and tank clean job.
Somebody had asked about how can they tell if they have microbial growth, or how do they know whether they have a problem in the fuel tank?
Right. So the most obvious one is if you have a ray core, you can see it in the filter bowl. However, we provide testing for fuel tanks. So if you can get access to the top of the tank, then we have a special tool we drop down in the tank and we sample the bottom of the tank. And just as you see here, this is a visual of the bottom of somebody's fuel tank. It's easy as long as there's access on top of the tank. That's what we need. And if there's not, we can even install the access ourselves. For example, right here, these are access plates that we install, and we do all sorts of sizes of these plates. But it's definitely something that can be tested. We use the device is called a fuel thief, and we take samples right off the bottom.
I was looking I remember you had a slide in here with where you were cutting in access ports. I'm sorry if I'm jumping around here, but I wanted to find that. There we go. I thought that was interesting. Not a claustrophobic type job, is it?
No, so you cannot be claustrophobic in this industry. So this is just a confined space cleaning job, and what that means is you're going inside of a tank with only one way out. It's very dangerous. We write permits for that, but we have all the safety precautions, air ventilation, gas air meters. But this is a job where we're just doing a confined space cleaning, and we didn't actually install this access plate. However, we have done access plates this large before, but this one was already installed by the manufacturers. We were just inside this tank cleaning it out.
Yeah, fascinating, Kellen. I have one question, might relate, Kellen, to my catch-22 comment.
Right.
You know, maybe if you start putting in an additive and then it's going to create maybe a problem that has been dormant or something like that. So I see a question here in the chat. Sounds like someone has a new boat. They had their tanks cleaned, new access port back in 2019. And then the boat sat in a boathouse for all of 2020. And should that person start using an additive now? Sounds like they're not using an additive, and maybe they're worried that it's going to create a problem.
Yes, absolutely. So the sooner you can if the tank's been cleaned, that's the best time to use an additive, because that additive is already going to be in the bottom of the tank. And if algae, and there's different ways sometimes algae can come from the fueling docks themselves. But when that algae gets into the tank, then it's going to already meet the additives that are down there. So yeah, definitely add the additives in. You can never do it too soon.
There's a question in here. I was looking. Which one are you looking at, Laura?
I saw one. How often should you change fuel filters?
Again, that's situational. Just follow the recommendations on that. However, if you think your tanks are dirty, then you can't change them too often. But I'd say change them in the wintertime and change them again in the spring, once, twice a year. But follow the recommendations. It's a little bit complicated because every tank's different. Some tanks are clean and the filters remain clean. Some tanks are dirty and those filters clog up a lot quicker. So as I said, yeah, that can be situational. But if you're unsure, change them a couple times a year.
There's a couple of questions on fiberglass tanks. One was, does diesel deteriorate fiberglass tanks? And the other one is advice on installing an access plate into a fiberglass tank.
Right, so diesel, as far as we know, it doesn't really react to the fiberglass. Fiberglass itself can fail for other reasons, but we haven't seen the microbial growth actually eat through the fiberglass tanks. That doesn't mean a fiberglass tank can't leak, as I said earlier. And as far as installing the access plates, yes, however, it's a different, you'll need a glass guy, what's called a glass guy. And what they do is they sand, we don't actually install, we sub out the fiberglass tank insulations, and he'll come and he'll sand down the fiberglass and install the tanks themselves. I do not recommend installing access plates, the ones we use, and I have one here. I don't know if you can see me, but these are the access plates we use, and I do not recommend using these on fiberglass tanks. These will seal, they're double gasketed. They will seal a metal tank, but fiberglass has too much texture. And so you're going to want to have a glass guy come and install an access plate on that.
We're getting short on time, and one of the things I'm sure that is on people's minds is, can you give us an idea of what's the cost to clean a fuel tank? And then also, can you talk a little bit about just fuel polishing?
Right, yeah, so I'll start with fuel polishing. Fuel polishing is a little bit complicated because you have to have the right conditions to polish your fuel. And what I mean by that is when you have that fuel tank, you have those baffling walls. You need to be able to get your, we call it a stinger, but essentially what it is just a tube, metal or aluminum or PVC, or like a vacuum. You need to be able to vacuum the majority of each compartment. So you're gonna need top access, and that's why it's complicated. You don't always have top access to your fuel tanks. And so it's not always an option. And then, so that's why we recommend fuel polishing also. You can't guarantee that it got 100% of everything out. If we can't get our cameras into every compartment and snap photos, there might still be some trapped in corners here and there. So it is an option, but it's situational. It doesn't always work. In fact, a lot of times it just isn't an option. And then, so the next one, yeah, cost. That's a big topic. So it completely varies on the access. I say that word a lot, but in our industry, that's what it's all about. So what's the access to the tank? How much time does it take to get to the tank? Once the tank is exposed, at that point we can move pretty quickly. But a lot of times we just get caught up with the access. Sometimes we have to remove walls or cut into floors, pull out carpets, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times it's the access that drives the cost up. Now, if you have good access, typically the cost is going to range anywhere from on a smaller tank. Let's say to generalize. Now, this is very general, but it's going to be anywhere from $1,000 to have your tanks cleaned, and then maybe a few $100s more to line it. And it can go all the way up to $5 or $6 grand, depending on how difficult it is. I'd say most jobs are somewhere right in the middle, the $2 to $3 grand, to have the tanks completely cut open, cleaned out, evacuated, fuel polished, and put back in. And as I said, lining the tanks isn't that much more after the tanks have already been cleaned. All the hard work has been done. So it's right in that. It's average 2 to 3, but it just depends on the access. Sometimes it can be a lot less, and sometimes it can be a lot more.
Got it. Is this, are we looking here at a liner or where you sealed something?
Yeah, this one's actually, it's a liner on top of a liner. We don't recommend doing this, and we don't recommend the single application liners. So this customer lined their tanks with a single paint-on liner, and what happens with those single liners, they're flimsy, they're weak, they're susceptible to cracking and chipping. And so that's what happened in this scenario is they used a single paint-on liner and it failed. And then we came back in and added an epoxy liner over, which held. And as I said before, sometimes in an emergency, that's all you got, and it might get you a few years. But we recommend if you're going to do the paint-on liner, do an A and B step liner. And this sometimes you have to improvise. And we were inside of a tank, and there was no way into the next compartment, so we're just cutting our way through into another tank. So this was a series of 3 tanks, all essentially connected, but there was no access between the tanks. So that's what we're doing, is we're prepping to install our own custom access plate inside of the tank here, because we got to be able to climb through these walls. And if you have a hole that big open in your baffling wall, that's a lot of weight sloshing back and forth. So we got to be able to patch those up if there's not already one installed.
Got it. Yeah.
Well, I know, Leonard,
Kalen.
we're right at the end. Can I just ask one more question that I saw
Yeah, go
come in
ahead.
there? Is that okay? I think it kind of goes into the catch-22 category. Someone writes, our trawler holds 1,100 gallons, which is several years worth of fuel. So topping off to limit air means having old fuel. They're just sort of putting new fuel on top of old fuel, and they may never get through their old fuel. So they ask, what should we do?
Well, in that situation, so believe it or not, the fuel itself, the new fuel actually sits higher up in the fuel tank. The older the fuel gets, it actually sinks to the bottom as it gets. So when we polish fuel, we notice we can take a sample from the bottom, a sample from the middle, and a sample from the top, and all 3 samples are going to look different because the fresh stuff is sitting up on top. So when you burn your fuel, you actually are burning, for the most part, the oldest fuel first.
And then what's the shelf life of diesel?
Well, with additives, you can go a couple years, 2 or 3 years, but it's all about the additives and having the fuel tested. If you're really concerned with it, we do sometimes send our samples that you saw. We send them off to an actual lab to have them. It only costs, it's not very much to have them sampled at a lab, and they can tell you exactly parts per million how good or bad your fuel is.
So that might be a first step to decide if you need all this work.
That could be, yeah. And it's like, as I said, it's if you have access on top of the tank, we can come in there and take a sample. And if you really want to know parts per million, how well it burns, how explosive it is, if there's microbial, if it's got distillation, then we'll send that off to a lab, and a few weeks later get the report back.
Excellent. Kalen, we want to thank you so much. The excellent questions here submitted, and excellent, obviously, advice from you, and very, very helpful information. We want to thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you guys. That was a lot of fun. If anybody else has any other questions, they can email us at our website, westcoasttank.com, if they didn't want to ask anything on here. But yeah, I appreciate it. That was a lot of fun. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, well done, Kalen. Fascinating. Great stuff. Thank you.
Mhm.
Join us next week on the 8th, and we have Lisa McLean from La Boat, and she will be taking us on a cruise down the Canal Rideau in Ontario, Canada. So join us next week.
All right.
Thanks,
And we'll
Lorena.
say
Thanks,
good
Leonard.
night. Yeah, thank you, George.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Maybe I'll just keep doing this, and push Peter aside. This was a lot
There
of
you
fun.
go.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're great at it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.